This time on Poll Hub, President Trump's decision to launch a war with Iran has seemingly not gone as planned in many ways. Not the least of which is that it has created a split in the Republican Party unseen since the 2016 election. Is it real? We will discuss. Then, grandparents have always been central to extended families, but these days, as we live longer and younger generations struggle to get financially independent, they are more critical than ever. We're going to look at a lot of data around that. And we end with a question that has 7 potential answers. Which will you choose? Let's get to it. And hi, everybody. Welcome to Poll Hub. I'm JD Dapper.
I'm Mary Griffith.
I'm Cassidy Connors.
And I'm Lee Marengoff.
So we are now entering week 4. We are recording, I should say, on Wednesday, because with the war in Iran, things do change very quickly. So it is possible that whatever we talk about here, some of it may change by the time that you hear this on Friday. But we are entering the 4th week, or in the 4th week, of the war in Iran. This weekend is No King's Day. It is the 3rd No King's Day. These are these protests that have come about over the last couple of years since Donald Trump won a 2nd term. And this one is expected, we'll see what happens, to be one of the largest. And they are kind of anti-Trump protests. There's a lot of data around the war. We've talked about it in the last few weeks, and not a lot has changed. The impressions Americans have about it have not changed very much, with one exception, and that is what's happening in the Republican Party. And we'll talk about that. Let me get through a little bit of data, and then we'll talk about that, and then get to the question about partisanship. And we don't want to do that. We're not trying to make light or push aside the seriousness of this war, the lives that are being lost, the destruction that is happening, to just talk about politics. But it is something that obviously we do in polling. We look at politics, we look at that. And so that is something we wanted to talk about today. When gauging the war, Americans have been asked a lot of questions around this that are aimed not only at finding out, do you approve or disapprove, but the impacts of it. For instance, gas prices, all of this other stuff. So CBS News, YouGov last week, they have the latest fielded poll as we record this. They were in the field late last week. Large majority say it is important to stop Iran's nuclear program and support the Iranian people. And that goes across parties. So if that's the goal, there's a lot of support for that. 92% say it is important to end the conflict as quickly as possible. And 53% say it would be unacceptable to end the war with the current Iranian regime still in power. Mark that one, because that's an important one. At the same time, 66% describe the conflict as a war of choice, not a necessity. And a majority, 68%, so nearly 2/3, say the administration has not clearly explained its goals. There are big divides here between Republicans and Democrats. Let me mention one, Lee, and then we'll talk about this. The military action against Iran, 60% disapprove in this poll from last week of the U.S. taking military action against Iran, 40% approve. That's very early in a war. That is not where you generally want to be if you're waging a war and your public is not approving. Just 8% of Democrats approve, not a surprise, but 84% of Republicans do approve. But that means that 16% of Republicans either don't approve or are not answering. So that's something. The Republican Party has been pretty much lined up behind Donald Trump for both of his terms, and this does seem to suggest some sort of a split. Lee, 4 weeks in, it's been a lot. Where are we now, 4 weeks into this war?
Well, we're sort of where we started with destruction having occurred. In other words, I think, and the poll data shows this, that because there was no clear explanation of the goals, it's very hard to measure success or failure other than what you bring to this kind of conflict. In other words, if you think destruction of citizen housing is important, then you might be opposed to it. If you think that's just a byproduct of war, then you might not be opposed. But it's what you are bringing to the table because, famously, presidents usually involve Congress to some degree. They rally allies more than obviously this was. That sort of came in the 7th inning where he said, come on, help me with opening up the strait. And so
after saying that he didn't need them. So
didn't need them anyway, but it's kind of sad that they're not helping even though he doesn't need them. And I think, look, Donald Trump is a master at changing the discussion from topic to topic, from hour to hour. What's happening in this particular instance, which makes it a little different, I think, is that although there are other topics he's bringing to the table, when it comes to Iran, it's not good to change the topic or to give a different interpretation of where we are and who's doing what, because it looks like you're not really running the show. And I think that's why people are kind of like, what's the rationale? Why are we there? Well, they're probably, and I'll move on to Mary in a sec, but there may have been 4 or maybe more goals. I mean, one was the nuclear weapons. Then we heard about regime change, which you just mentioned. And then we're concerned, obviously, with the price of oil. And then the one ally in this is Israel. And we're sort of helping them preserve their integrity or their jurisdictions. So that's 4. And I figure George Bush has got to be the most unhappy person, because he said mission accomplished once, and they practically ran him out of town. This has gone back and forth daily multiple times. And I know that's Trump being Trump, but it doesn't work when he's on the same topic of Iran and he keeps playing a shell game within it.
Well, Lee, I want to pick up on your point about oil prices, because what we're seeing, too, is that the war is causing economic anxiety at home. According to that CBS News YouGov poll, majority say the war is raising gas prices, not just in the short term, but as well as in the long term. So they're concerned there. And most believe that it will hurt the U.S. economy, at least in the near term. And most say that Americans should not be willing to pay for gas because of the conflict. So, Jay, you mentioned the divide that is occurring among Republicans, and the war is creating a significant split within the Republican Party. Another way to look at it is in terms of whether or not this is a good use of taxpayer dollars. So let me just mention some stats from a Strength in Numbers Verisight poll that was also fielded just last week. 68% of Republicans said it was a good or very good use of taxpayer dollars, compared with just 9% of Dems. And among independents, that percentage is 23%. And 24% of Republicans said it was a bad or very bad use when asked if the war would cause gas prices to increase by $1 a gallon or more. And this was asked before gas prices did just that. 31% of Republicans said they would oppose the war. And so, Jay, you alluded to a little bit of a debate about the split within the Republican Party, and it has to do with our good friend to the podcast, Harry Enten. So why don't you bring everybody up to speed on that?
Yeah, so I mean, what those numbers you just talked about, and Lee, when we, it strikes me that we haven't seen almost a third of the Republicans opposed to Trump on anything. I may be wrong. There may be something that I'm forgetting. But a third of Republicans not supporting the president in both terms, I just don't think we've seen that. Harry Enten, a friend of the poll, was on CNN, and he was quoting an NBC poll, and he put up a graphic. 100% of MAGA still supports Donald Trump. Got a lot of criticism for that. It wasn't incorrect, but a lot of criticism, because what's happened is the number of people identifying in MAGA in polls has been decreasing and is decreasing now. And so I guess when we talk about a split in the Republican Party, what is the Republican Party, right? So the Republican Party has kind of become the MAGA party, but there are Republicans out there still, and it looks like an increasing number of them that are not MAGA, that are Republicans, maybe in the old style. And they are finally showing up in this polling. I shouldn't say finally. They're showing up in polling now with this war 4 weeks on as beginning to say, maybe this isn't our guy on this issue. Is this real? Is it lasting? Is it the split that people have talked about coming, or is this ephemeral or a fog of war or whatever?
Yeah. I hate to say it's real. The only reason I would say to that is that the midterm elections are starting to get a little close. And I think the Republican Party is trying to think, well, where are we going to be the day after the votes are counted? But, so I think in that sense, it's real. But, I think that to Donald Trump's credit, he succeeded by breaking all the rules and still maintaining his second term, getting elected for second term.
Well, I mean, he's done everything that everybody's always said. All the pros say, no, you can't do that, you can't do that, you can't do that.
And so I think after the 20th time, I've learned my lesson. I thought when he went after John McCain as having been a POW and he got caught, I thought that would have done it. But apparently that was way back when, and it didn't, make much. I think one other thing, though, I'm pointing to this, is part of the disillusion with Trump have to go back to, first of all, it wasn't too long ago that gas prices were surging, and Trump was the one on the attack because it was Joe Biden's watch. And it seems like a kind of like hard now to take the other position on gas prices when you were there only recently and very loudly.
Well, also it didn't work for Biden when he said, "Look, the economy's good. Why isn't anybody listening to me? The economy's good." You know, it doesn't. When the prices are high in the grocery store or the prices are high at the gas pump, it doesn't matter what you say about how good things are. Nobody buys it.
The Marx Brothers famously, are you going to believe me or your own eyes? In this case, when it comes to prices, it's your own eyes. But, what did Trump run on? I guess three major things. Obviously, not being Kamala Harris was one, but the economy, prices were going to come down. Immigration, we're going to round up people, deport them, get the bad guys out, and then no wars. And you can argue certainly that the economy hasn't played out his way. The immigration hasn't been smooth. I mean, it's been very controversial. And the no wars took a back seat to lots of things internationally that he's talked about. But, the other point here, I guess, is, if the regime change was one of the goals, and that happened very early in terms of taking out the leaders, okay, but that didn't topple the Iranian.
It changed which Khomeini is in charge.
Yeah, and then,
his son's in charge instead of his father. So that's not regime change.
That didn't end. And if the folks in the Pentagon and the White House thought that was going to do it, that left them without a second follow-up. And I think that may be a little bit about it. I think he encouraged our allies, people on the borders in Iraq, go in there, we'll support you. None of that happened. And right now, that's not where this conflict is. There seems to be a other side, and the other side still exists.
Can I ask, before we go on to the next topic, either one of you or both of you, we have seen so many things where he said, whether it was damage or not, it's like, oh, this is going to really stick. Nothing sticks. And it's not sticking to Trump. It's that our attention spans seem to be so short that a month from now, is anybody going to remember this? Does anybody remember COVID, right? I mean, yes, we do. But I mean, all of these things, these things just disappear. And it's not just Trump things. During Biden, it was the same thing. We move so quickly through stuff. Is this different? Is a war in which Americans have died and Israelis have died and many Iranians have died, is that different?
Well, Jay, I could turn the question back to you in terms of how much does it have to do with the fact that information is being thrown at us so quickly that you don't really even have the amount of time to process the information that's coming at you before there's more information coming to you. And again, remember, as we've talked about on this podcast many times, the media landscape has changed. There are different sources, and different individuals are getting their news from different sources that just support their own political view and agenda.
So Lee, you get the last. You take the last swing at that. Does this last? Do people remember this? However the outcome, do people remember this? Or by the time we get to November, will it be another asterisk?
Not if we're still mired in some kind of conflict in the Middle East. I mean, because he was saying he would solve this before he even took office. But if you're the Democrats, you can use that stuff. I mean, it's like, that's a part of it. The other part, I would just end with this. The cynical position on this, and I don't know if it's cynical or not, is that a whole bunch of things are happening because of the Epstein files. And I don't know where to come down on that. I just think, on the one hand, it's hard to believe that you'd be sending troops and dropping bombs. But on the other hand, he obviously doesn't want those files coming out because they probably have something that he doesn't like. That would be a good guess on my part. So, that is sort of out there in the haze of all this. The Republicans and some of the MAGA people actually were the ones who said, release it. And so there may be a little bit of, well, what's he really up to on this? And if that's what they're thinking, then that could erode some support.
So there's somewhat of an old adage that the best part about being a grandparent is that you can return the kids at the end of the day. You get to spoil them, you have fun with them, hop them all up on sugar, and then they go home to mom and dad. But the reality of being a grandparent these days is much more complex. Grandparents often are the emotional anchor for families, they're economic contributors, and in many cases, they are co-parents. So let's take a look at some numbers coming from the U.S. Census Bureau. 70 million adults are grandparents here in the United States. That represents more than 1 in 4 Americans. And when we look at how old grandparents are, according to the National Center for Family and Marriage Research that's coming out of Bowling Green State University, the average age of grandparents in 2022 was 68 years old. And so 60% of adults age 50 plus have at least one grandchild, including step and or adopted grandchildren. And that statistic is from the Institute for Healthcare Policy and Innovation. So Jay, that's just the terms of the depth. But one thing that's really interesting in the research is the economic impact that grandparents are having in family life. Why don't you talk a little bit to that?
Yeah, we know that historically, when families used to stick together throughout history, the extended family would often live in the same house or the same village, and that kind of, I think we got away from that, and certainly in America in the last couple of decades. But there's still this, and maybe growing again, critical component of grandparents in kind of the economic life of an extended family. The National Center for Family and Marriage Research at Bowling Green, they did an analysis of the American Community Survey data, which is from the Census Bureau, from 2009 to 2021, and found that about 6.7 million grandparents live in households with grandchildren under 18. Of those, 2.1 million, so not a lot of people, but it's 2.1 million grandparents are the primary caregivers for these kids. And from the Census Bureau in 2014, among grandparents living with grandchildren under 18, 46% back in 2014 anyway, this is the last time this was measured, were in the labor force, meaning that there are half of grandparents with grandkids at home are in the labor force still working, and they're primary caregivers in some other cases, in 2.1 million cases. So there's this real kind of economic piece of this in which grandparents are doing double duty, triple duty. And I wonder, Lee, how much of that has to do with the generation. So if we're talking about grandparents now, we're talking about boomers.
Yep.
Boomers are the largest and the wealthiest generation in American history. How much of this do you think has to do with that, and how much of it is other things?
Well, we also know statistics like it's very hard to buy your own house now because it just costs a lot of money. Education is a lot. You have in most households, I'm not saying that statistically, so let me say in a lot of households, you have both the father and the mother are out working, dual income. So that's going to, by definition, if there is a grandparent in the vicinity who can at least lend a hand in terms of helping out, even if it wasn't financially, that becomes much more of a necessity because our culture has changed and the base of income has changed. But I think to your point, yeah, seems to be a lot more money in the pockets of older folks than if you're 26 years old. You may even still have loans to pay off, and you just it's harder to get started. And so I think that our culture has changed. And I think there was a time where the grandparents were maybe the kids would move far away and the grandparents were kind of like distance relationships. I think that's changing now. I think that there's a greater desire to, sort of be in the neighborhood because there's actually a great value. And I think it's also reverse. I mean, I think it's really very useful for children to get to know their grandparents. And that doesn't always the case because of age or distance. Now I think there's a little bit more of that perhaps.
And I want to take a look at some of what the research says about the emotional meaning of the financial support. According to the Senior List Grandparent Spending Study that came out in 2025, 51% of grandparents say their grandchild's happiness is worth more than any financial sacrifice. And 42% say providing financially is one of the most meaningful ways that they show their love. And I mean, from experience, my children have one grandparent living, and I would bet that my mom would say that my kid's happiness is worth more than any financial sacrifice that she would have to make. But also there's this component beyond just money, and it's this idea of the frequency of care and contact that grandchildren have with their grandparents. And Lee, you mentioned this to some extent, but among those with grandchildren under the age of 18, 49% provide care at least once every few months, 20% provide care at least once a week, and 8% provide daily or near daily care. From my vantage point, that is something certainly that I have experienced because when my kids were younger, I didn't really trust anybody else to take care of my kids. And so mom was always around. Now that the older two are older, they can pretty much make do on their own, but it's become something that's expected. My youngest is now, when grandma's not at the house, asks, is grandma coming over today? Are we going to see grandma tomorrow? And it's something that they look forward to. I mean, there are times when grandma's even stricter than mom, but they may not admit to it, but they certainly want to see her and expect her to be there. So there's a connection that really moves beyond anything that I can even describe. I mean, my middle child has a cute nickname for my mom that has stuck and that we even call her now. I won't share that because she and he would probably be embarrassed. But I want to bring Cassidy into the discussion because, Cassidy, this is the segment that you produce. And I was just wondering what sort of appealed to you about this topic.
My grandparents are a huge part of my life. I have 4 biological grandparents, now 3, and I have a step grandma. And I also have a great aunt who is very prevalent in my life. So I have a lot of the older generation like living around me. I see them all the time. And I just kind of wanted to do a segment to honor them, to let us all talk about our experiences.
Good.
I see them all the time. My grandma, who, like Mary said, her kids had a special nickname. I am seriously the only grandkid out of 11 to call my grandma this name. And I don't know how it started, but that's her name in my head. So everyone else calls her grandma, but I called her Mimi. So
there's a person who's willing to say what's on her mind. Thank you, Cassie. I appreciate it.
I know Mary left a cliffhanger with whatever that name was. But Mimi and my great auntie, they would watch my sister and I all of the time. It was either my dad working from home or my grandma and my great aunt. So they were very primary caregivers while my mom was at work. And they would take us to the park and everything. So yeah, this is just a special segment to let us talk about our loved ones.
I think that's great. And I'm going to throw in a little personal note also. So I grew up in Poughkeepsie, and my grandparents, because of a divorce early on, I actually could claim at one point 6 grandparents, but it really wasn't the case. I had 3 who were directly connected and 1 who was joined in on the divided marriage. So there were 4, and they lived in Brooklyn and they lived in Coney Island. And so not too far. Every time I had a vacation from school, I'd go down there. They were sort of central to my existence. And I will tell you, my grandmother on my mother's side, who was sort of the Rose Kennedy of our family, she was like the major dominant figure. So she was sort of the one that you stayed with in Bensonhurst in Brooklyn. But I will tell you that the first thing I did, talking about financial impact, when I went into that apartment on West 77th Street, I went to the drawer and I pulled this out. Now, this is not that this, see, Cassidy, things do like 50, 60 years ago. So my grandmother would take pennies, and she had 5 jars, and each of her 5 grandchildren would have a growing number of pennies from the time they visited to the other time. I don't know quite what to do with this, because this is like kind of like a major thing. And of course, the grandkids always look to see whose jar got further, and meaning they got more pennies. And obviously mine was right up on top because I was a good kid. However, so that was kind of like, that's not a big financial thing, but it sure got me attached in a hurry. Been spending a lot of vacations down there.
And all these years later, you still have that jar of pennies. So it had an impact on you.
Soon they'll be collector's items.
Yeah, well, so they may already be. So.
Okay, so we turn to our friends at the Gallup poll from 1952, and they asked the national audience, and this one everybody can join in on. I think it's something we all have an opinion on. What day of the week do you like the best? And the number 1 is Sunday at 51%, followed by Saturday at 17%. The other 5 days are single digits. And there is a group that say every day all the same, or they don't answer. And that adds up to 12. So the number 51 and 17 for Sunday and Saturday, which adds up to 68, is 68 of 88. So it's actually a lot of weekend stuff going on here and not too much any other time. Friday gets a little at 6%. So I would say I'm probably right in the center of this. I mean, I can't imagine.
Football. We can just cut to
football.
the chase.
Sunday, but now you have football Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, but nonetheless, Sunday is special that way. So what day do you clock in on?
All right, I'll jump in. I actually love Friday, and there's a reason for this. Yeah, Jay's applauding here, and It's because there's a light at the end of the tunnel, if you will. and you have something to look forward to Saturday and Sunday. So you know that when Friday rolls around, no matter how bad of a day you may have, not that we ever have those here at the Marist poll, that you will end the day and then you can decompress and then you have lots of fun on Saturday and Sunday. And Saturdays are great, but then by Sunday, you're looking forward to getting everything ready for school and re-entering the week. And anyone who says that every day equally, I want to know what they're on, because who really likes Mondays? Yeah. Cassidy, do you like Mondays?
No, I would go as far as to say Sunday is probably my least favorite because it's that impending doom of Monday. And then you just know your life is going to get harder. But I would say being in school, my favorite day typically changes by the semester, depending on classes. Okay. So if you were to just put yourself in my shoes and you have classes and work, Wednesday is my hardest day. So I have a 9 a.m. class, I have work all day, and then I have a 5 p.m. class. So Wednesdays is my worst, but then Thursdays, I think this semester it's my favorite because it's a pretty easy day. And I think Thursday is my light at the end of the tunnel because Thursday and Friday are easy, and then you get Saturday.
You're implying that you like it easy and you want the soft life, and it's not true. That's not who you are. If you were not doing anything for several weeks, you'd get really bored in a hurry, I think.
I'm thinking Cassidy's thinking over that. Well, maybe I could try having 3 weeks to do nothing and see if Lee's right. Anyway, my surprise is that Monday's more popular, and it may be a rounding error. I get that. But Monday got 4%, Tuesday got 2%. Or no, the other way around. Tuesday, whenever. I don't.
No, you're right. 4% for Monday and 2% for Tuesday.
Yeah. How some people like Monday more than Tuesday? I don't get it. Monday, I just, if you ask what's your least favorite day, I'm pretty sure Monday's going to win that. I am with Mary on this and Cassidy about looking at the light at the end of the tunnel. Sundays freak me out a little because you lose the second half of Sunday kind of thinking about what's coming up. Friday, it's all about anticipation. And I love Fridays for the anticipation of getting out of here and not here particularly, but just Monday, getting to the weekend.
Maybe Monday edges out Tuesday because some people think of holidays as a 3-day weekend. I don't know. That may be.
But maybe they work weekends. When I worked in news and I worked weekends, and Monday was my Saturday, so that was one of my favorite days. So maybe that has something to do with it.
Well, we'd have to get a focus group together on this because it actually has more variation in the responses than one might have thought. More reasoning behind it. That wraps it up. This is now Friday when you're listening to this, but it's Wednesday when we're actually talking. So I don't know what that meant, but have a good weekend. I hope it's a nice one, favorite one, and we'll catch up with you next week on another day, I'm sure.
That'll do it for Poll Hub this week. Poll Hub is produced by the Marist Poll at Marist University in Poughkeepsie, New York.
Mary Griffith is our executive producer.
Casey Schaff is our production supervisor.
The Poll Hub team includes AJ Gambino, Tommy Rogers,
Cassie Connors,
Sylvia Weiser, and Molly Goodger.
If you enjoy Poll Hub, consider telling a friend about us.
If you'd like to learn more about polling and survey science, check out the Marist Poll Academy, our free online learning portal accessible from our website.
Remember, you can always tell your smart speaker to play Poll Hub, and with any luck, it'll cooperate.
Finally, wherever you listen to Poll Hub, there is a subscribe button. Click it, and the latest episode will be ready for you in your podcasting app as soon as it's released.
We'll see you next time.